Good night, good evening. We are on Tuesday, the 14th of May 2024. I'm going to be sharing with you from this book, BUTLER'S, The Lives of the Saints. And I'm beginning with the 7th of July. And the first saint will be Saint Cyril and Saint Methodius, Archbishop of SIRMIUM, AD 869 and 884. I just say, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this night be at my side, to light, to guard, to rule and guide. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend me in this day of battle. Be my safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, I humbly pray. And do you, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell and all the other evil spirits, Satan, who prowl through the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. And it is probably about 8:45 p.m, which is early for me, really. So I'll just hold the book up so I can... It is a small font, so if I make mistakes, forgive me, please. Saint Cyril and Saint Methodius, Archbishop of SIRMIUM. These brothers, natives of Thessalonica, are venerated as the apostles of the southern Slavs and the fathers of Slavonic literary culture. Cyril, the younger of them, was baptized Constantine and assumed the name by which he is usually known only shortly before his death, when he received the habit of a monk. At an early age, he was sent to Constantinople, where he studied at the Imperial University under Leo the Grammarian and Photius. Here he learned all the profane sciences, but no theology. However, he was ordained deacon, priest probably not till later, and in due course took over the chair of Photius, gaining for himself a great reputation, evidenced by the epithet the philosopher. For a time he retired to a religious house, but in 861 he was sent by the Emperor Michael III on a religio-political mission to the ruler of the Judaized Khazars between Dnieper and the Volga. This he carried out with success, though the number of converts he made to Christianity among the Khazars has doubtless been much exaggerated. The elder brother, Methodius, who after being governor of one of the Slav colonies in the Opsikion province, had become a monk, took part in the mission to the Khazars, and on his return to Greece was elected abbot of an important monastery. In 862 there arrived in Constantinople an ambassador charged by Rostislav, Prince of Moravia, to ask that the emperor would send him missionaries capable of teaching his people in their own language. Behind this request was the desire of Rostislav to draw nearer to Byzantium as an insurance against the powerful German neighbours on his west, and this was a good opportunity for the Eastern Emperor to counterbalance the influence of the Western Emperor in those parts, where German missionaries were already active. It favoured, too, the ecclesiastical politics of Photius, now Patriarch of Constantinople, who decided that Cyril and Methodius were most suitable for the work, for they were learned men who knew Slavonic, and the first requirement was the provision of characters in which the Slav tongue might be written. The characters now called Cyrillic, from which are derived the present Russian, Serbian, and Bulgarian letters, were invented from the Greek capitals, perhaps by the followers of Saint Cyril. The Glagolitic alphabet, formerly wrongly attributed to Saint Jerome, in which the Slav Roman liturgical books of certain Yugoslav Catholics are printed, may be that prepared for this occasion by Cyril himself, or, according to the legend, directly revealed by God. In 863, the two brothers set out with a number of assistants and came to the court of Rostislav. They were well received and at once got to work, but the position was very difficult. The new missionaries made free use of the vernacular in their preaching and ministrations, and this made immediate appeal to the local people. To the German clergy, this was objectionable, and their opposition was strengthened when the Emperor Louis the German forced Rostislav to take an oath of fealty to him. The Byzantine missionaries, armed with their periscopes from the scriptures and liturgical hymns in Slavonic, pursued their way with much success, but were soon handicapped by their lack of a bishop to ordain more priests. The German prelate, the Bishop of Passau, would not do it, and Cyril therefore determined to seek help elsewhere, presumably from Constantinople, whence he came. On their way, the brothers arrived in Venice. It was a bad moment. Photius at Constantinople had incurred excommunication. The East was under suspicion. The protégés of the Eastern Emperor and their liturgical use of a new tongue were vehemently criticized. One source says that the Pope, Saint Nicholas I, sent for the strangers. In any case, to Rome they came, bringing with them the alleged relics of Pope Saint Clement, which Saint Cyril had recovered when in the Crimea on his way back from the Khazars. Pope Nicholas, in the meantime, had died, but his successor, Adrian II, warmly welcomed the bearers of so great a gift. He examined their cause, and he gave judgment. Cyril and Methodius were to receive episcopal consecration. Their neophytes were to be ordained. The use of the liturgy in Slavonic was approved. although in the office of the Western Church, both brothers are referred to as bishops, it is far from certain that Cyril was in fact consecrated. Underneath it's got little letters even smaller saying, like so much to do with these brothers, the history of these alphabets is a matter of debate. The Southern Slavonic of Saint Cyril and Methodius is to this day the liturgical language of Russians, Ukrainians, Serbs and Bulgars, whether Orthodox or Catholic. So for a while, still in Rome, he died on February the 14th, 869. The Italian legend of the saints says that on Cyril's death, Methodius went to see Pope Adrian and told him, "When we left our father's house for the country in which, with God's help, we have laboured, the last wish of our mother was that should either of us die, the other would bring back the body for decent burial in our monastery. I ask the help of your holiness for me to do this." The Pope was willing, but it was represented to him that it is not fitting that we should allow the body of so distinguished a man to be taken away, one who has enriched our church and city with relics, who by God's power has attracted distant nations towards us, who has been called to his reward from this place. So famous a man should be buried in a famous place in so famous a city. And so it was done. St. Cyril was buried with great pomp in the church of San Clement on the Coelian, wherein the relics of St. Clement had been enshrined. St. Methodius now took up his brother's leadership. Having been consecrated, he returned bearing a letter from the Holy See recommending him as a man of exact understanding and orthodoxy. Kozel, Prince of Pannonia, having asked that the ancient archdiocese of SIRMIUM, now Mitrovica, be revived. Methodius was made metropolitan, and the boundaries of his charge extended to the borders of Bulgaria. But the papal approval and decided actions did not intimidate the Western clergy there, and the situation in Moravia had now changed. Rostislav's nephew, Svatopluk, had allied himself with Carloman of Bavaria and driven his uncle out. In 870, Methodius found himself haled before a synod of German bishops and interned in a leaking cell. Only after 2 years could the Pope, now John VIII, get him released, and then John judged it prudent to withdraw the permission to use Slavonic, a barbarous language, he called it, except for the purpose of preaching. At the same time, at the bottom it says, for Methodius as a Byzantine, the alternative to Slavonic was, of course, not Latin, but Greek. God, it must have been a very confusing time to be around in those days with all these languages and different, probably that's why they all had to do Latin in the end. Excuse me, sorry. So, at the same time, he reminded the Germans that Pannonia and the disposition of seas throughout Illyria cum belonged of old to the Holy See. During the following years, Saint Methodius continued his work of evangelization in Moravia, but he made an enemy of Svatopluk, whom he rebuked for the wickedness of his life. Accordingly, in 878, the Archbishop was delated to the Holy See, both for continuing to conduct divine worship in Slavonic and for heresy, in that he omitted the words "and the Son" from the Creed. At that time, these words had not been introduced everywhere in the West, and not in Rome. John VIII summoned him to Rome. Methodius was able to convince the Pope both of his orthodoxy and of the desirability of the Slavonic liturgy, and John again conceded it, with certain reservations for God, who made the three principal languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, made others also for his honour and glory. Unfortunately, in accordance with the wishes of Svatopluk, the Pope also nominated to the see of Nitra, which was suffragan to Sirmium, a German priest called Wiching without a T, Wiching, an implacable opponent of Methodius. This unscrupulous prelate continued to persecute his metropolitan, even to the extent of forging pontifical documents. After his death, Wiching obtained the archiepiscopal see, banished the chief disciples of his predecessor, and undid much of his work in Moravia. Excuse me a moment, sorry, I have a cold. Sorry. During the last 4 years of his life, according to the Pannonian legend, Saint Methodius completed the Slavonic translation of the Bible, except the books of Maccabees and also of the Nomo-Canon, a compilation of Byzantine ecclesiastical and civil law. This suggests that circumstances were preventing him from devoting all his time to missionary and episcopal concerns. In other words, he was fighting a losing battle with the German influence. He died, probably, at Stermesto, Velerad, worn out by his apostolic labours and the opposition of those who sought them misdirected, on April the 6th, 884. His funeral service, wait for this, I'd have been confused, I can tell you. His funeral service was carried out in Greek, Slavonic, and Latin. The people carrying tapers came together in huge numbers, men and women, big and little, rich and poor, free men and slaves, widows and orphans, natives and foreigners, sick and well, all were there. For Methodius had been all things to all men, that he might lead them all to heaven. The feasts of Saints CYRIL and Methodius, always observed in the land of their mission, was extended to the whole Western Church in 1880 by Pope Leo XIII. As Orientals, who worked in close cooperation with Rome, They are regarded as particularly suitable patrons of church unity and of works to further the reunion of the dissident Slav churches. They are venerated alike by Catholic Czechs and Slovaks and Croats and Orthodox Serbs and Bulgars. According to Slavonic usage, they are named in the preparation of the Byzantine Mass. Everything below this is a very tiny little font, and I'll try my best, but I might give up on it. The political and ecclesiastical rivalries behind these events have a long and complex history, and in spite of all the recent work on the conflicting evidence, it is difficult to disentangle the details. The task is complicated by the judgments of some writers on the subject, having tended to be moved by nationalist considerations. The sources represent a double standard. For the so-called Pannonian legend, there are lives of Constantine, Cyril and Methodius, and the Greek life of St. Clement, and the rest of it is all just too difficult to read. It's italics and really tiny. So I'm going to stop that saint's live and go on to the next saint. And he was AD 200, so not so long after Jesus' time, was it? Saint Pantaenus. It's Pantaenus. This learned father and apostolic man flourished in the 2nd century. And had been a Stoic philosopher. He is commonly spoken of as becoming head of the catechetical school at Alexandria, where by his learning and excellent manner of teaching he raised its reputation above all the schools of the philosophers, and the lectures which he read, gathered from the flowers of the prophets and apostles, conveyed light and knowledge into the minds of all his hearers. As Clement says of him, that he taught with success at Alexandria is almost all that is known of the life of Pantaenus. There he had, it is said, the formation of the more famous Clement of Alexandria. The historian Eusebius records on hearsay that Saint Pantaenus had been a missionary to India, perhaps the Yemen and Ethiopia, and had there met Christians who had received from Saint Bartholomew, the apostle, the Gospel of Saint Matthew in Hebrew. This statement, repeated by Saint Jerome, has been much used by supporters of the theory of an apostolic foundation for the church in India proper. Eusebius knows of him as a man of great learning, ardent and zealous in the preaching of the word, and his nickname of the Sicilian Bee not only bears witness to his industry and to the sweetness of his teaching, but suggests the place of his origin. None of his writings have survived. I'm not reading the small print. The next saint is Saint Palladius, Bishop, AD 432. Saint Prosper of Aquitaine, in his chronicle, tells us that when Agricola had corrupted the British Christians by Pelagian doctrine, it was at the instance of the deacon Palladius that Saint Germanus of Auxerre was sent into Britain to combat the heresy. This was 429. In 431, Prosper says that Palladius was consecrated by Pope Celestine and sent to the Irish, believing in Christ as their first bishop, and he landed at Arklow in Leinster. He met with opposition at once, but he managed to make some converts, as we learned from an ancient life of St. Patrick, and built 3 churches which have been identified as Cilleen Cormac near Dunlavin, Tigroni near beside the Avoca, and Donard in the west of County Wicklow. Before the end of the year, Palladius, seeing that he could not do much good there, and wishing to return to Rome, departed to the Lord in the country of the Picts. Others, however, say that he was crowned with martyrdom in Ireland. That is to say, he crossed over into Scotland and there died. He was not a martyr, except in the non-technical sense of one who must have suffered very great hardships and trouble of spirit in trying to spread the gospel of Christ among an opposed people. And the story of his 23 years mission in Scotland cannot be maintained. The early Irish writers state plainly that he died soon after leaving their country at Fordun near Aberdeen, where his relics were venerated in the Middle Ages. The feast of St. Palladius is still kept by the Diocese of Aberdeen. He was probably a Gallo-Roman or Roman Briton. The next saint, I wonder if he's French, Saint Felix anyway, Bishop of Nantes, AD 582. Among the illustrious bishops of Nantes was Saint Felix, a nobleman of Aquitaine, who was eminent in virtue, eloquence, and learning. He was married when he was called to the See of Nantes towards the close of the year 549, when he was 36 years of age. But his wife retired to a convent, and he received holy orders. His zeal for discipline and good order appeared in the regulations he made for his diocese, and his charity to the poor had no bounds, but those of their necessities. His predecessor had formed a project of building a cathedral within the walls of Nantes, which Felix executed in the most magnificent manner. More than once he had to deal with his troublesome Breton neighbours. St. Gregory of Tours, though sometimes disagreeing with his suffragan, bore testimony to his sanctity. And Fortunatus, in particular, praised Felix, especially for his public works in panegyrics that did not err on the side of coolness. The holy prelate died on January the 6th in 582, on which his feast is kept July the 7th, being the anniversary of the translation of his relics. We know very little of Felix, besides what has been recorded in Gregory of Tours and in the poems of Venatius Fortunatus. Both writers are cited at length in the Acta Sanctorum, July, Volume 2. The next saint, or saints plural, Saints ETHELBURGA, ERCONGOTA and SEtHRIDA Virgins, AD 664 and 660. This ETHELBURGA was one of the children of the family of Anna, King of the East Angles. Having received the grace of a religious vocation, she went to Gaul with her half-sister, Saint SEtHRIDA, and was received by the Saint Burgonda or Fair in the abbey afterwards known as Fair Mountier in the forest of Brie. SEtHRIDA succeeded the foundress, an abbess of the monastery, and after her death, ETHELBURGA succeeded SEtHRIDA. She began to build a new abbey church, but did not live to see it completed, and was buried in the unfinished building. As the building was not carried on, her body was taken up after 7 years, when it was found to be incorrupt, and translated, that means moved, to the Church of St. Stephen. St. Ethelburga is mentioned in the Roman, French under the name of Aubiger, and some English martyrologies. With her was her niece, Saint ERCONGOTA. She was the daughter of Erconbert, King of Kent, and Saint Sexburga. So, Bede states that the reason she, her 2 aunts and others, went to Fair Mountier, Chelles, and other abbeys in Gaul, was either to lead the religious life or to be educated, was because there were so few monasteries in the territory of Angles. The same chronicler says that ERCONGOTA was famed for marvels, and that she was divinely forewarned of her death by a vision of angels, so that she made a farewell visit to each of her sisters, recommending herself to their prayers, and then died in great peace. Her body was also enshrined in the Church of St. Stephen. And Bede is our principal authority. The names of the princesses here mentioned appear in Bede, and the rest is all too small to read. The next saint is Saint HEDDA, Bishop of Winchester, AD 705. HEDDA was a monk, probably of the monastery of St. Hilda at Whitby, and was made bishop of the divided diocese of the West Saxons in 676. He resided first at Dorchester, near Oxford, England, but afterwards removed his see to Winchester. He was consecrated by Saint Theodore of Canterbury, who had great regard for him. HEDDA, while on a visit to the hermit of Saint Guthlac at Croyland, consecrated his chapel and ordained him priest. He was one of the first benefactors of the Abbey of Malmesbury, endowing it with land. King Ine, in his famous laws, enacted in a council of bishops and earldom in 693, declared that in drawing them up he had been assisted by the councils of St. HEDDA and St. Erconwald. St. HEDDA governed his church with great prudence about 30 years, exercising his episcopal office, says Bede, rather by his innate love of virtue than by what he had acquired from study. After his death in 705, many miraculous cures were reported at his tomb, and the men of Wessex took thence dust and earth, which they mixed with water and sprinkled on or gave to drink to sick men and animals. St. Hedda is commemorated liturgically on this date in the Archdiocese of Birmingham, and what little we know of St. Hedda comes mainly from Bede and from William of Malmesbury. The next saint is Blessed Benedict the 11th, Pope, AD 1304. Nicholas Boccassini was born at Treviso in the year 1240. He was educated there and at Venice, where at 17 years of age he took the habit of Saint Dominic. In 1268 he was appointed professor and preacher at Venice and Bologna, where he fruitfully communicated to others those spiritual riches which he had treasured up in silence and retirement, while always advancing in the way of perfection himself. He composed a volume of sermons and wrote commentaries on the Holy Scriptures, which are still extant. He was chosen prior provincial of his order for Lombardy, and in 1296 elected 9th Master General of the whole order of preachers. 2 years later, Brother Nicholas was created cardinal, and soon after Bishop of Ostia, and he went as legate à latere to Hungary to endeavour to compose the differences which divided that nation. He had some temporary success, for his learning, prudence, and selflessness everywhere gained respect, but his services were urgently required in Rome. Trouble had long been brewing between the Holy See and King Philip of France, who had been heavily taxing ecclesiastical persons and property to help carry on his war with England. The king entered into an alliance with the Colonna cardinals against Pope Boniface VIII, who, the French king, having circulated a forged document in the place of his statement of the Pope's prerogatives, in 1302 issued the famous bull Unam Sanctam, in which inter alia the relationship between the spiritual and temporal powers were set out. In the following year, Philip appealed to a general council to judge the Pope on a number of astounding charges, as infamous as they were false, preferred by the royal councillor William of Nogaret and a knight, William du Plessis. These gentlemen were experts in such work and later played a similar part in the arraignment of the Knights Templars on terrifying charges. Okay. I lost my place for a moment. A storm was raised against Boniface, who withdrew to Anagni, deserted by all who should have supported him, excepting only the Cardinal Bishop of Sabina and the Cardinal Bishop of Ostia, Nicholas Boccassini. With their advice and assistance, Boniface acted with vigour and promptness, and prepared a bull of excommunication against Philip. But the very day before its promulgation, Nogaret and Gilbelline leader Sciarra Colonna broke into the papal residence with a rabble of hired troopers and seized the person of the pontiff on September the 7th. 3 days later, he was released by the citizens of Anagni, returned to Rome, and on October the 11th he died. To such a troubled heritage did Cardinal Nicholas Boccassini succeed, for in a fortnight he was elected to the apostolic chair and took the name of Benedict. He set himself straightway to deal with the situation, with the confidence engendered by trust and submission to God, and unimpeachable personal uprightness. But his pontificate was too short for him to do more than take the first steps towards restoring peace. Blessed Benedict's policy was one of conciliation, without compromising the memory of his predecessor. He favoured the mendicant friars, and all the 3 cardinals created by him were Dominicans. 2, moreover, were Englishmen: William Macclesfield of Canterbury, who died at Louvain before he heard of his elevation, and Walter Winterbourne of Salisbury. In his private life, Benedict continued the mortifications and penances of a friar, and abated none of his humility and moderation. When his mother came to see him at the papal court and dressed herself up for the occasion, he refused to see her until she changed into the simple clothes which she ordinarily wore. I like that story. But he only ruled for 8 months and a few days, in which short space, as the Roman martyrology says, he wonderfully promoted the peace of the church, the restoration of discipline, and the increase of religion. He died suddenly at Perugia on July the 7th, 1304, and his cultus was confirmed in 1736. The various short lives of Blessed Benedict are mentioned in BHL, and all the rest is too small for me to read. But I love what he did to his mother. I think that was marvellous. He had her sent away till she dressed down. He wasn't having any of that. So the final saint for this 7th of July is just a moment. I got a tickle. Oh, this is cold. So the final saint is called, he's a blessed. Blessed Roger Dickinson and his companions, their martyrs, AD 1591. In this year, there suffered at Winchester on July the 7th, Blesseds Roger Dickinson and Ralph Milner, and on a date unknown, Blessed Lawrence Humphrey. Milner was a small farmer, or even a farm labourer, and brought up a Protestant. Upon contrasting the lives led by his Protestant and Catholic neighbours, to the great disadvantages of the first, he put himself under instruction and was received into the church. But on the very day of his first communion, he was committed to prison for the change of religion. Here he was kept for a number of years, but his confinement was not strict, and he was often released on parole when he would obtain alms and spiritual ministrations for his fellow prisoners, and also use his knowledge of the country to facilitate the movements and work of missionary priests. In this way, he made the acquaintance of Father Stanley S.J., who afterwards wrote a memoir of him in Latin, and with the same priest's assistance, a secular priest, Mr. Roger Dickinson, came to live in Winchester. He was a Lincoln man who had made his studies at Reims, and for several years he worked at the Winchester district, helped by Milner. The first time Mr. Dickinson was arrested, his guards got so drunk that he was able to escape. But the second time, Milner being with him, they were both committed for trial. Dickinson for being a priest, Milner for relieving him. At the trial, the judge being somewhat pitiful for Blessed Ralph, who was old and had a wife and 8 children looking to him, recommended him to make one visit as a matter of form to the Protestant parish church and so secure his release. But, says Challoner, Milner answered, "Would your lordship then advise me, for the perishable trifles of this world, or for a wife and children, to lose my God? No, my lord, I cannot approve or embrace a counsel so disagreeable to the maxims of the gospel." As Father Stanley states that Milner was entirely illiterate, we must assume that this is a paraphrase of his reply. These two suffered together, one of the most moving couples in the whole gallery of English martyrs. At the same assizes, 7 maiden gentlewomen were sentenced to death for allowing Blessed Roger to celebrate Mass in their houses, but were immediately reprieved, whereupon they asked that they might die with their pastor, seeing that they undoubtedly shared his supposed guilt, and should share also in his punishment, but they were returned to prison. Lawrence Humphrey was a young man of Protestant upbringing and good life, who, having undertaken to dispute with Father Stanley, referred to above, was instead himself converted. Father Stanley, in a brief memoir, speaks very highly of the virtues of his neophyte and his energy in instructing the ignorant and relieving the needs of those in prison for their faith. But Humphrey, being taken seriously ill, he was heard to say in delirium that, I bet it was a lie, the Queen was a whore and a heretic. His words were reported to the authorities, and before he was well recovered, he was committed to Winchester jail. At his trial, he confessed his religion, but denied memory of ever having spoken disrespectfully of the Queen. He was nevertheless condemned and hanged, drawn and quartered in his 21st year. That's the end of the Saints for July the 7th. How terribly sad. So the 8th of July, it's going to be, I'm not doing it now, Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, widow. So I'm going to mark, not mark, but just put Padre Pio, my lovely saint as a marker to where I stopped, because I don't want to mark this book. So thank you very much for listening. May God bless you and heal you. I'm sending you his peace in abundance, and may you always be happy and joyful at the Lord, in the Lord. I hope and thank you for listening to all these saints, because I'm very surprised. I'm very happy too, and I'm happy to record them because I love reading about them as well. But I am surprised at how many people are interested. I've got the one borrowed book, but I've got lots of others I've been buying over time. But I've got two that are the same, but my son's a teacher in a Catholic school, so I can give him that book that I've got twice. I didn't realise when I bought it that I'd already got one, or vice versa, because I hadn't recorded from them yet. I've got plenty to record from. So I'll be back with the saints. I can't say when. It's not like a daily mass. I'm committed to the daily mass, and I don't commit myself because I do other things, other books and all sorts of things in between. God bless. Night night.